Hello everyone, welcome back to Marian's World, and I'm coming from the dining room today because I'm going to hand sew myself a new dress. It comes as no surprise to you that I like sewing and I like hand sewing, and I do sometimes get comments if I'm wearing something and I say it's hand sewn. People think, well, why would you do that if you've got a machine? And I love using my sewing machine, I really do. But I enjoy sewing and I can run up a dress in, an afternoon if I wanted to. Sometimes I just want to enjoy the process. I want to enjoy sewing every seam. I want to enjoy it coming together under my hands, and there's a pride in doing it. So here's a couple of things. Well, this dress, this is linen. I sewed this a couple of years ago. It took me a week over the summer, and I hand sewed it because I actually bought the linen new. Linen's not what you'd call a cheap fabric, and I wanted to just respect the fabric. I did embroidery on the neckline, embroidery on the pockets, like that, and I love when I wear it. It's so lovely. Another project I've already got on. This linen coat is another of my hand sew projects. I actually started it well before Christmas and I was quite on with it quite nicely, and then it all stopped when I started to do the Advent diary, and I just haven't got back to doing it yet. So it's quite a long sweeping coat and there's going to be hand embroidery on it, and I have a real good vision of what I would like this coat to look like eventually. But in the meantime, as soon as I thought about making a dress, I knew I wanted to make this skirt a Kawandi. I thought I'd just wait until I've got the right fabric. The right fabric came along a few weeks ago. In fact, I'm sure I showed this at the end of one of my videos a few weeks ago. So fabric, Kawandi, I've got lots of scraps. I'm about to cut out a dress. Primarily, this is a hand sewing a dress tutorial. I actually made a muslin or just like a pretend bodice because it isn't a pattern I've used before. It's always better for me to try the pattern as it is and then make any adjustments. I realised that the neckline was going to be too high, and I had a bit of gape here at the armhole, and so I altered the pattern by doing not quite a full bust adjustment, but I cut the pattern here and gathered that up, overlapped it by about an inch to take the gape out. I'm almost ready to start hand stitching the bodice. As I decided I wanted to line it, I went and looked for some lining, but I've already gone and stitched the shoulders and the side seams together. And the first seam to do will be this centre back seam, and so I'm going to do it with a flat felled seam. Because I'm hand sewing, I nearly always finish my seams with either a felled seam or a French seam, because it just means you've got no raw edges anywhere. So I'm going to match them together, and I'm lucky really in that I'm working with a stripy fabric. And so it's a 1 centimetre seam which brings it just inside this green, olive green stripe. If I didn't have a stripy fabric, I would just measure my 1 centimetre down, it's on there really, and I could draw myself a line to stitch along. I am going to pin it together, so you definitely do not want slippage at all. I find that if I say that I've hand sewn something, I get quizzical looks as to, well, why would you when you've got a machine? But to me, sewing is enjoyable. I'm doing it for the pleasure of it as much for I enjoy making my own clothes, and I'm not usually in a rush necessarily. If I was in a rush and I needed this dress to be sewn by tonight for something, I'd do it on the machine. But normally, if I'm wanting to hand sew a dress or something, it's because I want to spin the pleasure out, and I don't want to start on the morning, wear the dress that evening and think, okay, now what? I don't mind taking a few days to do it, and it doesn't take as long as you think it's going to. I'm just going to use a beige thread, could use a grey, and I'm going to take about fingertip to elbow length. Don't want it too long. So the first seam stitch that I'm going to do for this flat felt seam is a running back stitch. It's different stitches for different reasons. If I was wanting a strength stitch, like when I've come to do the shoulders, I will definitely do that with back stitch. But for something like this, it's down the centre back. It's going to be double sewn because it's a flat fell. So I'm happy to do a running back stitch. And I'm going to start off just with a little running stitch there. I'm going to bring you in, see how close I can get to you. And so I've just taken a back stitch to start. Now running back stitch is really just as it's saying. Just put my hand through the camera stem so I can get nearer to you. A running back stitch, I'm going to take smaller stitches than I would if I was doing this for decorative. And I do want my thimble. I'm going to put my thimble on because it means that you are quicker and smoother in your sewing. So I'm going to just take 1, 2 running stitches, push my needle through and pull, and then I'm going to do a back stitch right back to where that stitch came from. These are actually a little bit bigger than I need, but if I hold that up, I'm going to just sew along this olive line. I'm going to do that again. I'm going to not put it over my finger because the fabric will slip, and you'll see how I'm going to deal with that in a minute. I just take 1, 2, so yeah, quite often I take 3. You just get into a rhythm, pull it through, take a proper back stitch which is right back to the stitch before, and that locks everything in. It means that you're not pulling things. I can take my pin out here, and now that I've got a little way away from that, I'm going to bring my tailor's ham in. Now I just made this myself, made it out of wool blanket, decent sort of a rounded shape, and the other thing is it is stuffed with sawdust, and so I can press over this. But the other thing I can use it for is for anchoring my sewing. What I'd really love is a Victorian sewing bird, which is a little clamp that goes on your table that then you put the end of your fabric in, and it means you've got tension. But I don't have one, so this is the only other way I can do it. Anchor with a pin. I'm not going to be pulling this off the table, it's got a weight to it, and so now all I need to do is hold this fabric and put a little bit of tension on and keep it flat. It makes the sewing quicker, it makes it smoother, my thimble's helping, so actually you'll see how quick I can sew down this. So I'm going to go 1, I've actually got a bent needle here, 1, 2, 3, and a back stitch. 1, 2, 3, push through, and a back stitch. And that is the main stitch that I will use for most of my dresses. Most of the things that I sew, I use this running back stitch because it eats up the inches for one. It's almost as quick as running stitch, but it's stronger because of the locking back stitch that goes in. And this, when you're doing a French seam or a flat felt seam, you're sewing the whole seam twice anyway, and so it's not going to be loose. 3 stitches and a back stitch, and you just get into a very satisfying rhythm. I'm going to take that pin out, I'm going to move my fabric back, pin it on and carry on. And as I say, you could definitely be drawing the line on, but because I've got stripes, I'm not going to bother. So 1, 2, 3 and a back stitch. Actually, this needle's been used so much it's actually bent. I think I'm going to change it, but I'll get down to the end first. 1, 2, 3, push through and a back stitch. Now you don't have to be using a thimble, but it does make for smoother sewing because your needle is, your thimble is supporting the needle as you go to collect it from the other side. So there's a definite way, and I would just say try till you find a comfortable one. This one is old, it's actually squashed. It has a flat area here where it's been squashed. It's always been like that since I used it. And of all the thimbles, and I must have a half a dozen or more, this is the one I use on a regular basis because it is so comfortable. It doesn't slip off my finger, it stays there, and it does the job it's designed for, which is helping you sew. So if you're just doing a bit slow stitching and you don't feel you need to have a thimble, it doesn't matter. But sewing clothes is different from that, and you want to be efficient, you want to enjoy it, and what you definitely don't want is that the end of the eye of the needle, when you're using a finer needle, goes into your finger or slips down the end of your nail. And so that's what your thimble is there for, helping you to sew rather than hindering yourself. So I've just done a few stationary back stitches there to finish that off. Needle in there, thread in my thread jar, which is just here. Take that pin out, and I've just done that long seam very quickly. So this is a flat felt seam. I'm actually going to go up the seam with my fabric scissors, and I'm going to cut that back to about, well, less than 1/4 of an inch. I don't need to press this or anything yet. I'll show you a close up of the seam. Hopefully you can get some of that. So I'll just have to gather this up so I can hold it. So my right hand is actually going to be spreading the seam, turning that over and holding it in. And I'll do that as I go, and once I pin it down it'll be easier. So now I'm going to whip stitch this fold down onto the front fabric, and I want to take the tiniest stitch. So I'm going to take up 1 thread on the front and come up just in the fold on the back, on the fold. So slip forward and take 1 thread, and slip forward and take a couple of threads off the fold. Just pull it snugly without pulling any gathers in, moving it along. Now that I've got a little bit of length behind me, I can pin it to the ham, which always is going to help. And now I can pull out a length of the seam, get the fold under, and just me keeping hold of the tension will keep that fold underneath. Make sure it's exactly where I want my fingers underneath, and making sure that that's nice and flat. My thumb goes in, and then there I am. I'm sort of sewing towards me rather than sideways, because that's the way that's most comfortable. And even though it doesn't take any effort to push the needle through, still my thimble comes in to do it. And but that's probably because I'm so used to sewing like this. And I think once you get a comfortable thimble, you'll wonder how you managed without it. I'll move that back. So in this way, like when I come to the skirt seams, I'll just zoom down the skirt seams with the running back stitch, because this is helping me to keep the tension. My right hand is holding the fabric flat, and then you just carry on sewing. And when I turn this over at the end, you'll see how beautiful a seam it's made. I've looked for the little sewing birds, and the real ones, you just don't even see them. And I've just been a bit wary of getting a reproduction one in case I was disappointed. I'd really like to just find one in a charity shop or a boot sale, and think, oh my goodness, there it's been waiting for me. Which would be very cool. But up until then, the sewing ham and the pin works just perfectly. One of the great advantages of sewing your own clothes like this is that you can sew on your knee on a night time while you're watching something else or listening to something. You don't have to be sitting at a table. And in those circumstances, I have been known to pin my fabric to the arm of the chair. Sounds like I shouldn't do that, but it works. This fabric's being a joy to work with, but it's old cotton. It's very soft, and it's not a tight weave. I think it's going to look nice. The minute I saw it, I knew that I would make a dress out of it. Snip, and then that's my flat felled seam finished of the centre back. Show you it from this side. You can just see my little slip stitches, and from the front you can hardly see where I've gone through. This is where it is here. This is it here. The little pips where my needles picked up a thread. So that is the centre back done. Now I need to do the shoulder seams. So I've drawn the line in there just so I can see where I'm going. And because this is more of a seam that needs some strength, I'm going to do this with back stitch. So I'm going to go in right at the edge, take up my little stitch, like that. And back stitch, I'm just always going to go back to the stitch previous. And really, when you've got your stitch, your thread needs to be sort of coming out in the middle of the piece that you've picked up with the needle, so that you've got an equal stitch both sides, and it'll mean your sewing looks nice and even, and don't pulling it too tight. So I'm back into where the previous stitch was, and I hop forward an equal amount in front of my thread. Back to the previous one and skip forward. And this will give a very strong seam. Take that out. The smaller the stitches, the stronger the seam will be. But on something like this, I don't need them to be tiny. These are probably, let's see if I can measure them. These are a couple of millimetres, 2 or 3 millimetres. I can pin it. It's always easier if you've got the other end of your fabric held. So I pin it onto my ham, and then my fabric is there to be manipulated in a lovely way that makes the back stitch so easy to do. And within minutes I can do this seam. Another advantage of hand sewing your clothes is you get more chance to think about what you're doing. You have so much more time to realise if you're doing something wrong. And if you have done something wrong and you need to pull it out, your hand stitching is probably easier to take out than the machine stitching would be. So there I've got a lovely back stitched seam now, so that you can see the little stitches on the front, and on the back I've got the crossed over stitches, which 4 waist ties here, and they have been pressed half sides to the middle, and I've pressed them again. This time I'm not going to do slip stitch, which would mean that I would come from there and slip along and slip along, because I don't want the stitch to be visible. So if you're doing this on the machine, you'd be top stitching it, or you'd do it inside out and turn it with a rouleau turner. So I'm going to hem stitch, which is straight the way over, go into the fold, come out and into the front. I'll see if you can. So I'm into the fold, straight across into the fold, and come out back on the front again, to make just a tiny stitch. So straight over, into the fold, and come out back on the front and straight across to the front again. And in this way, the only stitches that are visible, and they're not very visible, are the ones that are just going to go straight across all the time. And you get a very neat, beautiful stitch that you can hardly see anything on. I'll get it pinned there. And so now my finger can support the other side, because I want this to be neat. And I just keep coming forward. I'm just picking up a couple of threads on the front fold. And once you get so far along, you just move everything back and carry on. And you'll find that that little bit of tension that you get from doing this, if you haven't hand stitched like this before, give it a try, because you'll be amazed at how it helps you. I'll finish this one off and do the others. I'll show you how that's looking. That's the other side. I've actually finished stitching all of the ties. It took me about 20 minutes to do all 4, and I've got the first ones pinned into the bust darts of the front bodice, and I've been really careful to make them accurately pinned in with the pin here. And because I'm now not sewing along the stripes, I have marked my centimetre seam. And I'm going to wax my thread this time, because I've got a slightly longer piece and I don't want it to tangle up. And sometimes you just don't need to do that with cotton, but once I'm using a longer piece, it definitely helps. And I am just going to start right at the point of this dart, and I'm not going to start with a knot this time. I'm going to leave that little tail. I'm going to do a couple of back stitches just to start off. And because this is quite a structural seam, this bodice dart, I'm going to go back to back stitch on here, and I'm going to do quite small stitches. And although this definitely is not slow stitching in the modern way of doing the embroidery, this is still a very mindful way of sewing, and I really enjoy it. You can really get lost in the rhythm of the stitches, and there's a pride in making the beautiful seams and knowing that every stitch is being put in by hand. And the machines, they're so good. I love sewing on my old Bonina, but sometimes you just want to extend the pleasure of putting the garment together. I've got my ties all sewn in beautifully, and I've also sewn up the side seams and inserted the ties there as well. I'm going to put my right sides together, pin all around the neckline, and I will running back stitch all the way round and then turn it in and press. I'm using a longer length of thread because I'm going round the neckline. I want as least stops as I can, so I'm just making sure the thread gets a couple of times through the wax, which will really help it glide through the fabric, and also it'll help it stop getting in a knot. And as you can see, I've drawn my seam line like that, so I can start here. Start off with a couple of nice back stitches, and I'm off again. I've sewn all around the neckline, and every time I've come up to a different seam, I've swapped from the running back stitch to proper back stitch, and I back stitched about an inch over and an inch the other side. So I'm strengthening that and not leaving it to be too loose. And I did that over the centre back seam as well. And I'm clipping the seam, and then I thought maybe I'd show you that as well, because instead of clipping down like that, and plus if you do that you're not taking out anything, but if you fold your edge together like that, you can actually snip towards the seam, and you obviously don't go up to where you've sewn, but you take out a little notch, which is a much nicer way of getting your seam clipped. And it's quite quick. You just go along folding your seam allowance and doing a shallow cut. And you don't have to go right down towards where you've stitched, because you're actually taking out fabric, so it will let your curved seam lie really nicely. And now, so you can see how quickly that got done. I've finished the bodice now, and the neckline's pressed in beautifully, ready to do some embroidery along the neck edge. I really like these ties coming out of the front darts. It's a little bit wide for me still, so I need to do a little bit of altering to that, but I can do that later. The bodice is completed. So on to the main event really, which is making the Kawandi skirt. So I have already done my long seams of the skirt. Actually already patched the back of the skirt and finished the whole thing. And the only differences that I've done from my original Kawandi is that I'm not using a middle layer, because I thought maybe it would be too thick to be wearing, and I want to preserve the drape. I've also not finished the edges, because this will be in the waist seam, and at the bottom this will be in the hem, and so I haven't finished those properly because I want to have a piece of this fabric going around the bottom of the hem so it matches in with the bodice. So I'm really pleased with the way that's come out. I'm going to show you the Kawandi construction on the front of the skirt. I've actually started to sew the first layer on already, and I had to make one or two decisions about how I was going to do it, because the front skirt is down shaped with a V here, so it's, whereas the back is straight, the front is a V shape going down to a point below the waist. And so it was, will I follow that or not? And so the patches are going on square, but my stitching is going to follow the V, and I thought that would be quite nice going down the front of the skirt. So although it was definitely Kawandi style, I've made design choices because this is now clothes rather than a quilt that's going to be on somewhere else. I'm going to use my longest sashiko needle. Really like these ones. These are I've had these a while. These are tulip. I get asked about them. These are tulip sashiko needles, and they're assorted long. And the longest one is 7 centimeters long. It's really nice to use. And for the thread this time, I'm actually using crochet cotton. This is the vintage reel. It was unused, and so I've used, I would say, over half this reel on the front. Definitely the thing with a Kawandi is it does eat up the thread. And I'm going to take quite a long length, longer than you would normally sew with. As in my original Kawandi video, I'm going to be absolutely random. I'm not planning my patches at all, with the only other thing I would say is that I am using slightly larger than I did last time because I didn't want to risk all the seams making the skirt non-drapey. So I've maybe chosen slightly larger patches, but as you'll see in the end, some small ones do creep in. Of course, this is only one-sided now, whereas a quilt would have both sides visible, but on the skirt this is going to be the inside. And I'm going to get some patches now and just sort of plan the next couple along. I've shaped this one in to go on with the V shape of the front of the skirt. Now, by all means, refer to my original Kawandi video for more in-depth explanation of the heritage of this type of quilt and also how to finish the edges properly. That's not the way I'm doing it now because I'm making this a skirt. I'm keeping away from the edge because I know this is going to be gathered up as the waist seam. But I am still going to apply and sew all the patches in the same manner. So I've got my next patch here to come along. Before I get to the edge of this one, I'm just going to finger press this one under so that it's ready to go on. Now I could have put that one over the top and finger press that one under, but I've decided that I'd like the B one to be on the top. And I'm putting these patches on straight with the stripes because I want the Kawandi skirt to look properly, even though I've got a shaped edge here. And I am just going to carry on doing this lovely big running stitch. I'm going to put you on the other side. You could pin these patches, but this is, I don't know, the third one that I've done. I am realizing that I just don't need to. I can do it because you only need to worry about the bit that you're sewing. As long as that's flat, everything else just seems to work as you're working round. And because of that, it's a really good project to sew in your lap. And so the skirt back that I showed you earlier, that has taken me 2 evenings of sewing. And it doesn't matter that this bulk of it is just all crumpled up on my knee. As long as I keep flattening it out so that I'm sewing flat, then it all works out and it doesn't seem to come to any harm. I'm trying to use longer ones across this waistline because I'm aware this is where my gathering thread will be, and so I am just going to cut that into the shape of this waistline. Just take that diagonal off there. This is actually a piece of brushed cotton. So every single scrap that I am using on this skirt is coming from my stash. It's all either old fabric, like this brushed cotton sheet, or it's fabric that's left over from some of my other sewing projects. So when you get up to the joins, You really need to make sure that your needle goes through your finger pressed seam to hold it. That is quite crucial, and I'm definitely making sure particularly that I'm doing it on this one, because I know that I'm going to be wearing this as an item of clothing. But other than that, you just sort of get into a rhythm of a little stitch on the front and a big stitch at the back. And I would say I'm about 1/4 inch on the front and 1/2 inch on the back. It's as easy as you can see me doing. And just move it along. Obviously, mostly I'm not doing it on a table. I do it on my knee. And because I like the scrappy effect, I just pick up the next scrap along and put it on. Unless it's something I particularly don't want together, I'm just taking them as they go. So I'm ready for my next scrap. It's going to be this blue. And tuck them under by a good 1/2 inch. You need a good overlap. And then you just pick it up and carry on sewing. The only time I did use the pins was as I came to the middle of the back of the skirt. You need to sort of, as you work your way to the middle, you need to know that everything's overlapping in the right way. And then at that very end, I laid it out flat and proceeded to pin all the overlaps in place so that I could just go ahead and sew it. So this patch actually goes right down to the hem, and I shall come around, because the back's done already, I shall come around the hem of the front. That I've got it nicely flattened out at the moment because I'm going along the hem, and this is folded because it was very thin. I folded it in half, so I'm just putting that patch underneath, and I'm going to continue all the way along the hem. I'm just going to stop the sewing short of the hem because I know that I would like a piece of this fabric to go on as a hem to tie in the bodice and the top together. Otherwise this fabric will only show on the bodice part. Normally you'd be turning in and sewing right along the very edge, but that's why I'm not, because I'm doing a skirt. So I'm just going to turn the corner and carry on stitching along. And because there's actually no middle in this one, it's actually being really soft and lovely to sew. If your stitches are not coming up right on the fold, just take an extra stitch, just take another one, doesn't matter. In the grand scheme of things, you won't see that. What you will see is a beautifully stitched quilt that will look very different from any other quilt you've probably ever made before. As I said, I've got the crochet cotton in. I'm not sure whether this is going to last for the whole of the front though. If it doesn't, I'll just have to find another one. Also, I did consider doing this skirt almost like cantha stitching, and there's a fine line between what they are. I think if you're using patches and you're going around the perimeter like that, sort of as if you were going like that, around, and then inside and going around, and then inside and going around, that is traditional Kawandi. If you're using a whole cloth and you're just doing parallel rows of stitching, that is more like cantha. But the stitch itself is identical, but they come from different heritages. So if you're making a quilt for the first time, not making a dress like I am, but making a quilt, I would say that you need something soft really. So in my first video, I was recommending double gauze, and that was, it's like sewing through butter. It's just so lovely. That sounded really weird to say sewing through butter. It's just really soft and lovely. It makes the hand of the quilt lovely. This that I'm sewing through here is a thrifted cotton sheet. It's not a tight weave, it's not a high thread count or anything. It's just really soft and lovely. And because I'm not actually putting a middle layer in with this one, it's, as you can probably see, it's not being any bother at all. You can see I keep pulling, and because this is a skirt, I don't want it to be rumpled up too much. I'm on with my second go around now, and actually some of the bottom fabrics are almost reaching the one's top because I tried to use slightly larger pieces than I did before. Really, I just have to keep going around. And so I'm going to put a link to my original Kawandi video, because that's where you'll get all the tips for making it in the first place. So anyway, I'm going to finish this off. You can see where I am here, going up the side with my needle, and I am just going to, nothing is pinned, I am just going to flatten and fold as I go. Other than that, I'm going to carry on going around in exactly the same way as a Kawandi, and I'm going to end up in the middle, and I'll show you that when I've finished. I'm back in my dining room to show you that I've actually finished my dress, and I think it's absolutely lovely. Before I show you what it looks like on, which I will do, I just wanted to point out one or two things about it. I loved sewing this pattern, this Willow pattern. It really came together well, even though I did make adaptations. So I love wearing pinafore dresses because I wear dresses all year round, and I like ones that I can put long sleeve tops or jumpers underneath, and so that's why I altered the neckline a bit, but that worked well. I also lined it so it's there's no raw edges underneath. The Kawandi technique for the skirt has worked out so well. I'm pleased I didn't put the interlayer in the middle, because the patches plus the old sheet have definitely made it substantial enough to wear as a dress. The patches went over the side seams, so you can't actually see where the side seams are, which I like that about it. I added a hem onto the bottom in the same duvet cover, and I actually used double fabric because when it was single it seemed too flimsy comparison to the quilted skirt part, and so I actually just folded quite a large bit in half. I running stitched it onto the front. I'll show you in a close-up. So it's running stitched on, so it's in the same method as the Kawandi, and then on the back it got herringboned in. So it looks lovely inside. I don't think that those long stitches on the back will be of any problem at all, and I absolutely love it. I've done some hand stitching along the neckline, some top stitching with pearl cotton along the neckline, and I blanket stitched around the armholes with the same colour pearl cotton. So I actually top stitched with the pearl cotton around the waist as well, where you would have probably top stitched with a sewing machine anyway, or you would have understitched. One of the bits I really like about it is these waist ties. They just cinch in where it needs to be, and because I was trying to be respectful to the heritage of Kawandi, I actually made little tiny foulard to go on the bottom of the waist ties, and I think it's just like a little cute addition. So I hope nobody thinks I've been disrespectful to turn a Kawandi into a dress. But I absolutely love it, and I did make the whole Kawandi in the same authentic way as I did my first one. Please do have a look at that video, because it's full of helpful tips to do the best version of a Kawandi that you can get. And with no further ado, I'm going to put this on and show you how it looks. Well, here it is, and I'm very happy with it. It's got lovely deep pockets, I really love the way the skirts come out. I mean, it's just exactly me, all this lovely colour, and I'll be wearing this when I go to the sewing show, because that's coming up in a couple of weeks. I'm going to wear this and my patchwork jacket. I'd be super colourful. I particularly love these waist ties that are actually coming out of the side seam and the bust dart. What a clever little place to put the ties. So it's infinitely adjustable. I'm hoping it's going to adjust smaller as I lose a bit of weight. But there you go. It's just the skirt drapes nicely. I do love these pockets. They're very nice and big. It drapes nicely. It's a good length for me. It's coming just under my knees. There, that's the length, just under my knees. And it's very nice. I like it, and I'll look forward to wearing this in the summer without a t-shirt underneath or a long sleeve top. But for the winter, it's nice. I can put a cardi on the top. Feels very substantial on here, but you can see how drapey it is. That's the beauty of a Kawandi. A lovely drapey patchwork gorgeousness. Anyway, I might as well finish here in the dining room and just say I hope you've enjoyed that tutorial on how long it takes to hand sew a dress, and I haven't actually told you how long it took me. Altogether, I reckon about 4 days over the past fortnight. So it took me, I did the whole bodice in one afternoon. That was the bodice and the lining and putting them together one afternoon. Each panel of the skirt took me just over 2 evenings of just sitting sewing it on my lap. So there was probably another day. And then the hem, the finishing, fitting in the first place, cutting it out, took up another while. So I reckon about 4 full days of sewing, but interspersed over either evenings or an afternoon or a couple of hours here and there. So you can hand sew something. It doesn't really take that long, not as long as people think. And okay, I could have run this dress up without the quilted skirt in an afternoon maybe, but I wouldn't have got quite as much pleasure as I had making this, and I will feel proud as punch when I am out wearing it, because it's just lovely. I might not make it the stripy top next time. I'm not sure that the stripes do much for my bust line, but it was a £3 duvet, so you know I've got an exclusive dress that nobody else has got for the princely sum of 4 days of hand sewing and £3 to a charity shop. I can't do better than that. Happy stitching, everybody. Happy whatever you're doing. Thank you for visiting me at Marion's World, and thank you to everyone who has supported me on the Ko-fi page. I was overwhelmed the other day. It's taken me so long to get around to doing it because I was worried about it, and I can't tell you how much it's amazed me. So thank you, absolutely, from the bottom of my heart. It makes a big difference, and I'm just pleased that you enjoy what I do, because in the end I just do what I enjoy, and that's about the bottom line of it. Thank you a lot, everyone, and see you when you next visit Marion's World. Bye, everyone.